Welcome back to the Impact Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host Sabine M, Probst, and today I'm conversing with Roy Kimhi, an impact producer, filmmaker, and manned submersible pilot from Israel. His travels inspired his work and passion for ocean conservation, deep sea exploration, submersibles, virtual reality, photography, and film. Today, he's going to share with us his experience working in the impact filmmaking field, including his film The Great, an underwater virtual reality film about the great white shark. His previous work as a submersible pilot with National Geographic Pristine Seas project, and more. Welcome, Roy. I'm really happy to be filming this episode with you and sharing your experience and work with the audience. This is going to be a really interesting episode. Today, we will talk about your experience as an impact producer, filmmaker, and submersible pilot. But before we do so, I want to ask you a little bit about your beginnings. As your career in diving started, when did you start taking your camera with you and starting to capture the beautiful underwater world? And when did you see a need to take action for ocean and water conservation?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Sabine. It's really exciting to meet again after Jackson Wild in 2022. My journey really started with underwater photography in the Red Sea. I was born and raised in Israel, also living there currently. And for me, I used to drive down south to, see one of the most northern reefs in the world, actually, if you look at the coordinates. So basically, went down there, dove for the first time when I was 15, fell in love, bought this little, point and shoot camera in a little plastic bag for like 6 meters. And that kind of, became a career afterwards. I became a diving instructor, and then a submersible pilot, and eventually kind of like an underwater specialist working on documentaries that are with impact or with environmental causes or social environmental causes involved. I've been diving, all around the world, including Egypt, Jordan, Thailand, Maldives, Latin America. And I guess, it started really in my early 20s working as a diving instructor, building my way towards the industry, ended up living and working in Central America for 6 years, but I came back here to the Middle East a few years ago.
It's definitely nice to talk with you again, and very cool to hear that you started diving at such a young age and all the experiences you already had. As you just said, during your work as a diver, you got the opportunity to get trained as a submersible pilot. How can someone imagine that training? You sent me some photos, so let's have a look whilst you tell us more about it. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, interesting that you chose this one first. This is a 360 image. I was testing some gear back in the day within the cabin. So before of everything, this is the deep sea submersible. It's operating mainly in Latin America, but actually currently it has been operating in the South Pacific with a big National Geographic project of Pristine Seas that went for several months, I think maybe even almost a year. I was personally very fortunate, honestly, just to know the team that operates this submersible. So happened to be that my scuba diving instructor, the guy that taught me diving when I was 15, was actually one of the pilots. And when the position got open, I was actually teaching diving in the Caribbean, in Mexico. And basically, I got this phone call and he tells me, hey, there's this opportunity. Would you consider, it's kind of a 3-year contract, living in Costa Rica, but mainly on the boat. Are you interested? It didn't take me a lot of time to say yes. And the training took something between 8 to 12 months when you kind of learn all the different positions within the operations. So, for example, you first learn how to be the support diver. After that, you learn to be a surface officer, so the person in charge of the submersible on the surface while it's diving. and eventually, gaining the hours and the theory and the experience as a submarine pilot. So I was piloting a Seaimagine submersible. It was for 1,500 feet or 450 meters. It could operate up to 6 hours or 72 hours in emergency. And I had this. It's quite deep. It's the twilight zone. It's a fascinating area to explore. Very, very different from what we know from the shallows. And the work was just constantly with scientists and filming underwater with remote operating cameras, and it was really a fascinating job, and I'm very fortunate to have this opportunity to do that.
It really sounds fascinating. I have another picture here of you and two other people in a submarine. Is there a camera outside the vehicle as well?
Yeah, it's actually, that was my first interaction with an underwater VR production, and afterwards in my career I made my first film was an underwater VR film. So this picture was taken in Darwin Island on Galapagos Island. We've been there for about a month with National Geographic Pristine Seas. And here you can see the engineer from National Geographic, and on the right side it's Avi Klapfer, the owner of the diving operation. And we've been diving into a new dive site they called it Darwin Cave, and we were filming a 360 underwater film to be used later on for their policy change efforts. Pristine Seas is a project that is aiming to protect some of the most pristine places on the planet. They've done that very successfully in the past decade or more. And over here, we were filming that little VR film with this system that they call the lollipop. Because if you see it without not underwater, it really looks like a big lollipop. It was a custom-made camera system with very good sensitivity for low light. So it was a really exciting project to be working on.
That's great. That was custom made, and yes, it looks like a fun lollipop. And in this picture, you are controlling the submarine. Yeah,
it's quite deep. So underwater, it's quite interesting. When you go very deep, I mean, you can still see, depending on the conditions. If it's a cloudy day or there's a very thick thermocline, it can be very, very dark. But you can kind of see where's the surface. But you always have the lights of the sub that you can use, but it's really interesting because the fish that lives there, a lot of them don't see the red light because red light doesn't penetrate so deep. So we would always bring this little red light and we would use it, and you could see the difference between when fish react to the white light in comparison to the red light. So that picture was taken on Cocos Island, I think around 300 meters. While operating the sub.
Amazing. And what there are the controls and what are the other items around you?
What you were just pointing on, you can see this little greeny dials over there on the side. This is part of the life support system. So similar to a spaceship, you need to provide your own oxygen and remove your own excess, the CO2. Now this submarine was for 3 people, and you just constantly, just like a big rebreather, kind of, for those who are familiar with rebreathers, you're constantly injecting pure oxygen to the cabin, and you monitor it. You have oxygen monitors, and you make sure you keep it around 20.9% or 21% at all times. And under it, you can't see it, but under the pilot seat there was several canisters with soda sorb, which is a material that absorb the CO2. So you kind of you try to keep it more or less the same as we breathe, on the surface. Then there's the joystick that you see that I'm holding. This is what's operating the sub. It's very similar to a helicopter. And the other white joystick in the center was the pan and tilt for the remote operated camera. So at times you would have to do both piloting the sub and filming, and sometimes you would have a more experienced cinematographer in the cabin, and then they would operate it. So yeah, and then there's a little radio on the side that we only use on the surface because obviously underwater it wouldn't work. It's a VHF kind of radio, and then you also have your own headset because you have constant communication with the surface. So you speak with the surface officer at all times. You check in every 15 minutes to make sure your stats in the cabin are all right. So that's like a little overview of what you see here in this picture.
Really interesting. What a cool job. In the next picture, here you aren't that deep. I can still see the sunlight going through the water. Where have you been there?
Yeah, so this picture, first of all, this is the wonderful conservationist Alex Munoz. He was the director of Pristine Seas in Latin America. This guy, he really innovative in terms of how he does conservation. He helped a lot of protection of new marine protected areas in Latin America and more. And over here we were diving on the Socorro Islands or the Revillagigedo Islands in the Pacific waters of Mexico. So it's very remote islands outside of Mexico. And on Socorro Islands, it's very famous for the giant mantas that live there. They're very friendly, they're very big, they're quite different from the other mantas that we're used to in other places in the world. And here it was really almost like a touching distance. This manta was like really, really curious, and it came almost like touching the acrylic or the dome. And Alex was able to get some really, really nice pictures over here, getting very up close and personal.
Is it working well to take a photo through the dome? I can imagine you need to find the right angle.
It's kind of like, it's tricky. It's a little bit like with your underwater housing. When you have, fisheye lenses, you need, like for the domes. So like macro lenses would be very weird because, like the optics wouldn't work very well. So pretty much any wide angle lens, but it also depends where you're at in the cabin. So if you really shoot from the side, you have distortion, but so you kind of want to shoot from the center of it. So it's a little bit like, placing your camera in a big housing, so to say, with the dome port. So basically, in the beginning of each dive, the safety diver or the support diver needs to actually push the submarine a little bit just to get the first inertia to start to go down. This dive was also on the Galapagos Islands. The scientist you see here is Dr. Enrique Sala. He's the director of Pristine Seas project, a brilliant conservationist and ecologist. He wrote this beautiful book that I highly recommend called The Nature of Nature. And he's done his research in the Mediterranean. He built a model that then he kind of amplified all around the world. And here we were going on a dive on the Galapagos Islands. We found this beautiful octopus in about 280, if I recall, 280 meters. That picture was taken there.
Amazing that you could explore these beautiful environments with these interesting people. And here we can also see the submarine descent, and we can see how small it is and what the controls look like. Who was in there with you? Yes,
this is also from Mexico, and actually it's interesting that we brought this up because the guy on the left side here is Dr. Mauricio Hoyos. He's a Mexican scientist. He's expert in sharks, specifically in great white sharks. We met on this expedition on 2016, and we kept in touch. And afterwards, when I made my first VR film, The Great, then he was involved in it, and we were capturing some images for his research. He's also a great storyteller. He's doing a lot of education work in Mexico and globally, and kind of telling different stories about sharks, in which we can maybe dive a little bit deeper later on.
This sounds like really interesting work. Here we see the submarine and the camera from outside.
Yeah, that's the lollipop. That's the lollipop from the National Geographic engineer. So this is how we mounted it. So if you recall, you saw this picture from underwater. So you see it's quite big. And actually, when you shoot underwater with VR, not just underwater, but generally, you want to have a distance from the object so you can stitch all the images in post. So you see, it was a little bit like outside of the submarine, maintaining enough distance to have a good picture, good image afterwards.
That's very interesting. And as you had finished your training, you had the opportunity to work overseas and on one project many of us know, Pristine Seas. Can you tell us more about the experience working on this project? What did your tasks look like?
Sure. So back in the day when I worked with Pristine Seas, I worked as a submarine pilot and I operated some of the remote operated cameras with the submarine. I think the Galapagos expedition is really one of those that really sticked with me, especially because of just the innovative approach to impact filmmaking. They brought a group of scientists, so they were doing all their surveys in order to kind of write reports and apply to politicians that are in charge of this area, which is Ecuadorian waters. In fact, I had the privilege to take the Minister of Tourism to a dive on the Galapagos Islands. So, they have kind of a triangle between the science and then there's the media work, because they would produce a documentary for National Geographic channel or the different media channels. But also they would try to focus on policy and changing policy and making new marine protected areas recognized and signed. For me, it was the first time that I really got to work with this kind of teams, seeing a very different approach to impact and how to use media and leverage it to make an actual measurable change. And as you saw earlier with the pictures, I also had the chance to work with the engineer and inventor Corey Jaskolski that built this VR camera. Back in the day there weren't much. Was really the beginning of the technology, and he built a custom-made system that looked great and worked very well. But in terms of the task, I was just focusing on running the operations. So lots of checks for the submarine. We would do something between 2 to 3 dives a day, depending on the depth and the length. And beyond that, while I was diving or piloting, I was also filming from them with the operated camera. And after each dive, I would sit down and fill up some scientific surveys, because with time you get to really know which species you see. Of course, you rely a lot on the scientists, but you fill up different surveys. So, you've seen this and that species from this and that depth, or you monitor when the thermocline starts and ends, what are the water temperatures in different depth. And hopefully that helps, the researchers later on to do that. So basically, running the operation, filming underwater with the sub, doing the scientific surveys, and managing the media afterwards for the project.
Amazing. Yes, around Galapagos Island there is a stunning amount of marine life, but sadly, as pretty much everywhere, not the best protection. Very often it's money that's missing to provide better protection. I think you had an amazing time there. What were your highlights on working on Pristine Seas?
I think it was really about the impact model that they have. Leveraging media, science, and policy together. I think I drew a lot of inspiration from it to the work I do today. I definitely believe, in the power of media and the power of impact storytelling to create measurable change. I think, that we need to ask ourselves as storytellers, how do we do more of that? Or how are we being more intentional? And how can we leverage this? And, for you and me as documentary filmmakers, we always kind of work in between those fields. And I think that was like the greatest takeaway for me that I took from working on this project.
Great. And then you worked on a liveaboard and created this amazing VR film, The Great. Can you explain to the audience shortly what VR is and why you decided to use it before you start telling us about the film?
Sure. So I guess simply put, VR stands for virtual reality, and it stands for kind of like a simulated experience that employs to provide the participant with an immersive feel of a virtual world. So you immerse yourself fully immerse yourself in a virtual world. It can be, CGI, computer generated images, so like animation, or it could also be real imagery or live action. And VR is just actually apart from a broader definition called XR, or extended reality. And under XR, you have, VR, virtual reality, as I said, completely immersed, but you also have AR, which is augmented reality. So it's a little bit like the Pokemon Go thing when you use something and you kind of see layers on top of the reality that you can already see. So it's not fully immersed. And very recently there was a new type of technology coming in called MR, or mixed reality, in which, the new headsets, they already have cameras and they have sensors, and you don't necessarily have to use remotes with your hands. You can, they kind of recognize your hands. So you could wear a VR headset, but you can still be in the room and see what's happening in the room, and it would add layers on top of that. It might sound confusing. I really recommend trying the different things so you get a feel of, what's the potential, of each and every technology. But this is just to give you a broad, just a general explanation on VR and XR.
Thank you for your explanation. I think all of us now can imagine a bit clearer how the film can be experienced. And I think that this technology could be really great alternative to aquariums. There you see the animals anyway, just behind the glass wall, and you can touch it. So why not use this technology to show the animals instead of capturing them and having them live in these tiny places? Filming them in the wild, showing their natural behavior, and then having people be immersed in that sounds way better to me. And the reasoning that some people bring, that they have to see it in front of them rather than on screen, to care about it and to understand it, is not valid to me, to be honest. Because if you have to see it in front of you to care and to be fascinated by, why then are there so many kids out there that are fascinated by dinosaurs? I'm sure they didn't travel back in time to see it. So yeah, I think that would be a great alternative. But let's get back to topic. Please tell us why you decided to create this wonderful immersive experience film.
So it's a great question. There have been many films that dealt with overfishing or sharks. Basically, I think it all starts really with the film Jaws. The film Jaws, it came out in the 70s. It was based on a novel by Peter Benchley that was written in 1974. And then, back then, an unknown director called Steven Spielberg took it on and really made, a very powerful film that got very popular and really, ran all around the world and really changed people's perspective about what sharks are and how and what should we feel about them. And personally, I think that was a case of how a monster was created. I think that ever since it was much easier for humans to fear sharks, hate them, kill them for no reason really. Science actually tells us that if you have a lot of sharks in a specific ecosystem, that's actually an indicator for a healthy ecosystem, and they are keystone species in many cases. So I had my own personal journey on discovering this. It was happening a little bit before I started to work with the submersible. I was going just as an underwater photographer, as a diver, to Cocos Island. And I just wanted to dive and meet sharks face to face for the first time. It's very famous for many species of sharks. Some people call it the Mecca of the sharks. You can see those big, clouds of schools of hammerheads. You have black tips, white tips, tiger sharks, Galapagos sharks. You have so many species. So, as a person, I wanted to go and see for myself, right? And I wanted to kind of face that fear. And I was just, amazed. I was amazed by, first of all, how much they are afraid of us, and how difficult it was to actually gain, like an up close and personal experience, specifically with hammerheads, because hammerhead sharks are very shy. They don't like divers too much. They're not as curious as other sharks. But putting aside the fact that they're beautiful, they're actually really interesting because they have 7 senses. So they experience the world in a very different way than we do. But, at on that same trip, when I was, just falling in love with the animals and really appreciating, its power, for me, was like going to, see lions in the savannah, or traveling to Africa to a safari. It was like, this is so powerful. Even better, maybe. Yeah, well, I think both are great. But then one morning we woke up during that liveaboard trip, and it was a kind of a cloudy day. And we, hopped on the panga or the skiff or the inflatable on the way to the dive site. I won't forget it because, the dive masters, they used to, jump to the water to check the currents first, just to see, where we start, where we end. And I just remember the face of that dive master when he came out. He was completely pale. He said in broken English, we have to cancel the dive. We cannot dive here. We have to go somewhere else. And we tried to understand what was happening. And apparently, over the night, poachers came into that dive site and left some fishing hooks and lines. And Cocos is a marine protected area. It's a World Heritage Site, actually. And for me, it was very powerful to see that these things happens in a place that is so far away from shore. Cocos Island is 550 kilometers off the coastline. I mean, you need to make such a long way to get there and to fish the sharks. And that kind of drove me into this whole investigation in Central America on what's happening with sharks. I started to research about it. I spoke to fishermen, to conservationists. I was following several of them for some time. And I realized that, we're killing anything between 100 to 273 million, with an M, sharks a year. So that was really the driving force to make this film. And I really wanted to choose the most iconic of them to try to tell the story differently. And of course, that would be the great white shark, coming back to Jaws. So I was very, very driven to try to show how they were in real life, in their natural habitat, without all these, fictitious story about them. Now, you have to respect sharks, right? I mean, it's very, it's a very, this animal obviously can make damage, but the fact is that very little people are being killed by sharks every year. So we talk about, let's say the conservative estimate is 100 million sharks being killed by humans every year. Sharks kill about 6 to 10 people a year, and most of the time it's actually a mistaken identity, normally if we think about surfers, for example, when do they go to surf? In the morning, right? Or in the afternoon normally?
Early in the morning, night.
Exactly. So happens to be that this is the same times that sharks normally hunt. And the fact that there's so little people that are being killed, or that there are people actually surviving sharks attacks, because the shark normally realize they do kind of like an exploratory bite. They realize it's not what they were looking for. It's not a fatty seal. It's not a sea turtle. And basically, I think that was a tragedy. That was a story I wanted to tell. And I wanted to use an immersive technology so people can really experience it in a personal way. And hopefully will drive them to also take the leap and go and dive with them afterwards.
I definitely would. Sadly, sharks are villainized and not understood enough by many. They can touch with their hands as they don't have any, so they feel by biting. And they also can swim backwards, so we are the ones that need to move out of their way, as we can swim in all directions. And Jaws sadly made many people fear sharks and the ocean. I feel like as filmmakers, we should really think about how we portray animals and nature. Sadly, the wrongdoings of people to nature, they also don't stop at borders. They think of many different ways to get what they want, no matter how bad it is for nature. I also know about some illegal fishing happening in South America from my family that lives there. It's really sad. And the government can't really help because they don't have enough money, and that's sadly often an issue.
Yeah. You also had some experience with sharks, right? I mean, by diving and...
Yes, not like you, but a little bit, mostly smaller sharks.
Still beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. To me, all sharks are beautiful. You sent me a photo of a hammerhead in a net. Was that captured before you made your film?
Yeah, so that was before that. As I mentioned, I was doing some research and investigation, and I got to Panama to join some of the artisanal fishermen, so the fishermen that are not going as far away from the shore, and you know, realizing that they don't only fish for the adults. This is what we've seen in Cocos Island, in Galapagos, in other places that are very remote, and it's a different fishing technique. It's long line, which is a very simple yet very efficient way to capture sharks, tunas, sometimes dolphins, unfortunately, but you know, big animals and predators. But here, you know, it was mainly with the nets. So during the investigation, we also realized that, you know, there are different kind of pressures because, you know, if we fish the adults out in the open ocean and then fishing the neonates and the juveniles in the coast, you know, it was just showing us how much pressure there is on the species to survive. So that was part of the investigation, and again, part of the driving force to try to do something about it.
It's really sad to think about all the different methods us humans have created to kill other species and our own. To see how your film was created, let's watch the behind-the-scenes video and then talk more about what we saw there.
It's hard to even describe what it feels like to see a great white shark until you actually experience it. You think about great white sharks, you see photographs of them, and it is nothing like seeing them in person for the first time. You know, it's very exciting to just open your eyes, be in the cage, and see that shark for the first time swim by. There's no way to describe it until you experience it on your own.
When I was told that there was going to be an expedition to film great white sharks with the VR system, I was kind of curious to see and to find out how it was going to be.
Isla Guadalupe is probably heaven on earth. It is the most amazing place I've been in. Every second you jump into water, something incredible happens that you've never seen before. I've actually had the best dive ever of my whole entire life right now.
The thing about 360 is it gives you control of what you want to see. When you're watching normal TV or a movie, the director decides what you're going to see and he shows it to you. But when you have 360 or a VR type of experience, you can look where you want to look.
So this is a 360 camera. It is comprised by 6 cameras, 4 around the horizon, 1 up, 1 down. The thing with the 360 camera is it films everything.
There's a lot of filming challenges that come with 360. First of all, you have to have it very steady. You have to get it away from structure or people. If it's too close, it just gets distorted.
The composition is a significant element in virtual reality storytelling. We wanted to create a perspective of how the viewer is being immersed underwater. Things didn't work out at first, so we had to come up with new ideas.
That thing that you see laying over there is number 5. It was designed to document great white shark behavior in the wild, in their own realm. With that cage, you can have the opportunity to be right next to a great white without being in danger. And the main reason why number 5 was designed is because we wanted to document great white sharks fighting, feeding, and mating.
That was one thing that I was really surprised about, is being around the great whites. They really seem, for the most part, much more subdued and tranquil than I thought they would be. They were just not what I was expecting at all.
In the past few years, I've met many people who came back from those trips, facing their fear of sharks. And I remember how they told me that it helped them to get over other obstacles in their lives.
Yeah, definitely the science is the foundation of the knowledge we know. But if we just keep doing science, all we want to have is data if we don't show it to the people. With the 360 VR system, it's going to be a new generation of images.
I think virtual reality is a powerful medium. By breaking the rectangle, by experiencing stories firsthand, we hope those experiences will change your perspective.
So nice to see the behind the scenes film, and this is a whole film on itself. Where can people watch the VR film, and what do they need for it?
So actually the company that financed it back in the day was called Pelagic Fleet, today it's called Pacific Fleet. It's a diving operation that operates both in the Socorro Islands and in Guadalupe Islands, so they can take viewers and participants to actually do the dive. With the Solmar 5, it's a very classic kind of liveaboard, and I was managing that operation for a couple of years. I lived in Baja, and the way that we produced it, I mean, I knew the team very well, and it was a very short production as well. It was like 2.5 days on site, and we had a trip running at the same time, so our time in the cage was very limited. We did have the SPOC, or SPOC, or self-propelled oceanic cage. They also call it the number 5 because it was the 5th cage on the boat, and that was the cage that was independently operated. So you can think about it as an open submarine with full face masks, and
Can I have a look at it?
Yeah, I think we have some pictures of it.
Here we have the great white shark again, beautiful. And here you mean, right?
Yeah, this is the Spock, we were filming and using this also to collect some data for Dr. Mauricio Hoyos that I mentioned earlier, and the pilot of this vehicle. He's also a marine biologist and a fantastic underwater cinematographer. His name is Eric Higuera, again a Mexican marine biologist that has been doing a lot of great work. You've seen him in the video. I think one of the things that he said there really resonated with me. We can focus on the data and we can keep creating data, but I think it's not enough. We need to also tell a story, and I think Eric as well as Mauricio, both of them are doing that, and they're doing it really, really well. And I think that, our role, maybe as documentary filmmakers or storytellers, is really to try to translate, those exciting things that we can learn from science, and just bring it to audiences in a way that they can get excited about it and want to learn more about it and maybe even go study it someday. So that vehicle was part of the research that they're doing. They're mapping, they can photo ID most of the great white sharks on Guadalupe Island, which is the location we filmed this, one of the best places actually in the world to see the great white sharks, together with South Africa and other places. So that's the Spock.
Amazing, I have to go there. Am I seeing right? Are there two people in this?
Yeah, no, it's for two passengers. The photographer in the front, this is me, and then the pilot seats. We have big steel air tanks over there, and a full face mask with the radio, so you can speak with the pilot and direct where to go, and also, of course, be in touch with the surface. But this really, unlike other cage diving, this really allows you to get close to the subject and not letting just the subject come to you. It was really interesting because one of the behaviors that we've seen with the great whites was they would never let us pass them, so we would always be the wingman. Like we would always be a little bit to the off. So if we speed up, they speed up, and if we slow down, they sometimes slow down. But there was kind of, I don't know if it was a dominance kind of behavior, but it was really interesting to see the dynamic of how they react also to our presence.
Yeah, that's quite cool. The sharks probably thought, what a weird thing, I need to be careful. And this cage was only for the camera?
Yeah, so that's a normal cage. Actually, it's an interesting thing, because it was very challenging because I told you earlier that we have to have a minimum distance between the camera and the objects, and this is why we couldn't really film with people inside the cage and the camera, because they were just too close, and then we couldn't stitch it right in post. So we were thinking also, composition is very different. We spoke about this in the video, but you really need to put yourself in the shoes of the viewer and think, where is the perspective they need to be at? And then they will be their own directors. You can watch the same VR film several times and you can focus on different things. So you kind of becoming the director, right? I think Terry Wirtz, the astronaut that was working with us on this production, he mentioned that in the video. So that was a very, kind of out of the box solution. We just located the camera in the center, so it would stay there, and then we launched the camera alone. And in the film, it's a very intimate moment, right? It's a very intimate moment because you kind of start with this aerial view. You arrive to the island, you understand that you're about to meet the great white shark for the first time, and then you go on your own to go and see it. So there's a lot of excitement within this shot, and I'm happy we were able to put it through. All the team on the boat helped in and helped us make this happen. But again, I think it just comes to show that the composition approach should be very different when we're thinking about VR. So we need to think about camera as a person, right? Because the person can go and look all directions. So that's a little bit behind this picture.
So for the viewers of the film, it then looks like they are inside, as the camera is mounted inside with the strings. If the viewers move their head, then they see the inside of the cage, right?
Yeah, so the underwater cinematographer, Jannica Mikkelsen, she had this very big pole that she would, use with... So if she would be in the cage, and there are several shots that you can see from outside of the cage, we would use a pole, and then we could film the people. But when the people were inside the cage underwater, it was just impossible just for the distance.
I mean, if you have the VR set on, you would see the floor when you look down, you would see the ceiling when you look up.
Yeah, exactly. You should try it.
I definitely will. And this was captured with a 360-degree camera, right?
Yes. Yeah, so here I'm using the pole that I just mentioned. So the camera is outside of the cage, kind of like, the shark was kind of next to it. So this is a 360 image, right? This is stitched into just one, but it's really looking all directions. And you can kind of see, where's the cage, where's the shark. And inside the film, you're actually very close. You're closer to the shark, and if you look back, you see the little motorized cage behind you. So kind of give you the feeling that you are in the water, you are with this vehicle, and you're getting up close and personal with the whites.
Yes, a great experience. And here we can see inside of the cage that can move.
No, this is Eric Higuera. This is Eric operating. Really, he knows the sharks very well. He has been going to Guadalupe Islands for many years. He knows the behavior. He can recognize some of them just by seeing them. They have different characters. They have different names. So yeah, it was a fantastic person to work on this project with. Not only because of his scientific knowledge, being a marine biologist himself, but also for his understanding of the power of the image and composition. And we had a lot of fun, honestly, during this production.
Amazing. You told me this film wasn't financed by a production studio or a film grant. How was it financed? And in your experience, what are good alternatives to get funding that aren't grants?
I would say that you always need to look for the win-win situation. The Pacific Fleet is selling, trips to go and meet the great whites. I think three months out of the year. So obviously, it really helped in terms of, people that wanted to do this trip, but maybe were a bit afraid to go and do it. So that was kind of a virtual experience, an immersive experience to go and try it out and see how it looks like, in real life, and not based on other films like, I don't know, from Shark Week or from Jaws or otherwise. So, we kind of found a way where we realized that it was, mutual gain or mutual benefit here. I think it was very innovative and kind of impressive, actually, for the company to do that back in the day, especially with our executive producer, Jorge Cervera Hauser, which is a Mexican filmmaker that did Mexico Pelágico, which is a feature film on Netflix about the treasures of Mexican waters. I think it was, we did it on a very low budget and pretty much just, financing what we really needed for post-production. But what I would recommend to filmmakers to try to map, who are the stakeholders that can potentially benefit from it, who this might be interesting to. It can be from the science world, it can be from the private sector, like this case. It can be from nonprofits that may want to, maybe they have a campaign that they want to promote, and it's in line with the agenda. VR is still complicated to finance because it's not like, shorts or features or series where, there's a broadcaster, there's a film fund, and, you kind of find your way in financing it. Here, you need to think about the applications as well. How am I going to use it? Is it going to be in museums? Is it going to be in a location-based kind of screening? Is it going to be online or on an app for, like Oculus or others? I guess you need to realize, and it's project dependent, but I would recommend creators and creatives to try to think outside of the box and to try to really find creative ways for financing.
That's good advice. Film grants are very competitive, and so looking for other options is a really good idea. You spend a lot of time at sea, and I'm sure you saw a lot of things. What were the most beautiful and most shocking experiences to you? Let's look at some pictures.
Sure. Wow. Okay. That's a hard question, honestly, because there are many exciting things out there, and sometimes you can think about the big things like, I don't know, deep water sharks, like the prickly shark in the eastern tropical Pacific, or I don't know, blue whales or stuff like that. But actually, the one I wanted to share was a very special night that we had on Cocos Island. And back in the day, I remember, we finished the day, we brought the submarine back, we were just having dinner, after taking a shower and just relaxing in the evening. And suddenly someone screams, "Oh, there's something at the back of the boat. You have to come and see it." And we come and we see, if you go 2 pictures down, we just see, a swarm, a lot of pelagic crabs that kind of drifted into the island, and just came to the, to the stern of the boat. And basically, we put on, all the gear, putting the camera in the housing as fast as possible, jumping in. It was actually, we didn't really understood back in the day. It was just later on where other projects came in and documented it for, I think it was Blue Planet 2. It was the Alucia vessel that later on became the Ocean X or Ocean Explorer. And basically, it's a very interesting thing because we realized later on that this species of crabs are actually eating each other. So that there's this interesting phenomena, and they also try to eat us. I mean, it was like really trying to take them out from, like they would pinch us. Of course they wouldn't make a lot of damage, but it was really, just kind of trying to get the housing and the camera inside and trying to get the image. But it was just really, those moments that may never come back. It's something that can happen once in a lifetime in terms of just the behavior or the phenomena. And we took pictures, we sent it to the scientists for recognition, but it was definitely a night to remember for me.
Did you realize at first glance that they are crabs? I think from top seeing them at first in the dark, I wouldn't have recognized it.
Yeah, it took a moment to realize, but you can see it from different perspective. We just free dove with them, bring in all the lights, and it was also in the night, so it created this very interesting kind of dark background that really popped out the details of the animals. And they're beautiful. They have this kind of little wings that helps them to navigate. You can see the wings on the left side of the how do you call this? They have green eyes, so they're like really beautiful animals. But I think just the fact of the phenomena, just like how unique it was, I think that was making it really exciting. And I think another very powerful moment, maybe not as happy, was really on a submarine dive to a dive site that was called Everest Seamount. So there's the Everest, the real mountain, and there's Everest Seamount on Cocos Island. It's a relatively shallow dive, down to 90 meters. The peak is at about 50. And there was always, this area over there where we would see black corals. And I remember it was, I think it was the end of 2015 when we had a dive, and I remember that we were filming them and we were documenting them, and then we had a big project 2 months, in another location, and that was during El Nino year. So the water were really warm, very long, and I remember that we came back to the same dive site 2 months later, and everything bleached out. So, on one hand, it was, it's a beautiful thing. Also, bleaching can be a little bit tricky because the white can also be popping out and kind of beautiful, but it's really, corals dying. So that was a very powerful moment for me, seeing how fast can corals bleach and black corals in specific.
That's so sad. I had a similar experience when I filmed cold water corals and sponges in one place and gorgonias in a different place. And the cold water corals and sponges I first had filmed in spring, and then the second time in late autumn when the diving season was pretty much over, and in spring before when the diving season hadn't started yet. And it was really shocking to me to see how much the divers had damaged the life in this place. So many broken corals and damaged sponges. I was really surprised that the dive centers took so unexperienced divers there. I came back the year after and was diving there in summer, and there then I saw how the divers did destroy it. I mean, no one did it on purpose, but their buoyancy was just so horrible that they should have trained it more before going through these tunnel systems there. But yeah, it's often shocking to me to see how much also we unintentionally destroy nature and even ocean lovers like divers. And the other example was when I was filming gorgonias for my film Mediterranean in 2021. And then again last year. And when I was there the first year, I was so stunned by the beauty. So many beautiful gorgonias. And then last year, many of them didn't exist anymore. And many others were dying and doing not well at all. I'm not sure what happened there. I still have to reach out to one of the biologists I know there and talk with her what could have happened there. But it was really sad to see if I would look at the footage I had filmed in 2021 and then last year it looks completely different. But yeah, let's go on. I think in 2019 your career shifted a bit. You founded One Atmosphere Impact Productions, an impact media production company based in Israel, and began collaborating as a VR director and producer with Amberjack Films. What can someone imagine what an impact producer does?
Well, first of all, impact is a word that is being used in many fields. So, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. I can tell you what it means for me and how I see it. I think, for me, impact producer are people that work in intersectionalities. Okay, so the way I see it is that I work in the intersection between, the nonprofits. I work with nonprofits for about a decade now. My previous role was a full-time role, running a climate diplomacy program for EcoPeace Middle East, as you mentioned. It's a very unique organization that brings together environmentalists that are from all the regions, so Jordanians, Palestinians, and the Israelis that are working together on shared environmental issues. And again, this is the same approach of, kind of finding the common ground or finding the win-win solutions in a way. So bringing the nonprofits, also bringing, the private sector, the production companies, knowing to speak the different languages, nonprofit speaks, in a certain language, and then private sector production company would speak a different language, but also bringing the science in. Working with academics and researchers and see how we can not only bring them into the research phase, but maybe also into the impact campaign. You can find interests on, many things where you can, do surveys before and after people watch your film, or try to really understand how do you use and how do you make a measurable change for your campaign. So I would say that impact production is really working in intersectionalities and being able to put different hats and help also the creatives and the artists thinking about, impact from the very beginning and bringing this kind of impact first approach.
What is important when trying to create impactful film and photo and in general? How important is it to be specific with the goals you want to reach?
I think it's very important. I think we lack specificity in a way. And a lot of impact campaigns, I think a lot of times we sometimes can put very ambitious goals. I think that, being modest and understand that, it depends on your budget and depend on the resources available. But, for me, the way I see it, first of all, I think it's important to have an impact first approach. So the earlier you bring the impact producer to the creative process, I think it's best, because then it can be much more intentional for the writer, the director, or the producers that are working on this to know what they want to reach before they go and write their scripts. And already have in mind, what is the campaign going to look like, and how the film can leverage it, and how it can actually be embedded within the storytelling of the piece. Beyond that, I think it's important to connect with change makers on the ground. So really understand who is this film being done about? How do we get them engaged? I think it's really important to have those voices also embedded in the narrative, but also embedded in the impact campaign. So this is where, I would always recommend try to see which organizations and individuals are working on the topic that you're making the film on, and make sure that you connect with them early on. because they can also become amazing partners, and they can help you in finding the best story that you can find. And I guess the very last thing is bringing all the relevant stakeholders together. And when I say stakeholders, I mean bringing people from the private sector, governmental officials, municipality officials, nonprofits, and so forth. And really, before you dive in, just try to map and understand what is the topic about, and how can I bring, broader group of people into the table to try to just, make good together. And different people would bring different expertise. So yeah, I think that those are like my top three things. So I'll summarize with an impact first approach, connecting with change makers on the ground and the people that are actually working on the topic you're covering, and then bringing all the relevant stakeholders from all the different sectors together.
Guys, I think that will help a lot of people who are planning an impact project. Would you say these three things are absolutely necessary when thinking of starting to plan an impact project?
I think you need time to really ponder and understand what's your vision. I think clear vision is key component, because, and it's kind of hard with documentaries, because sometimes, you go and you try to find your narratives, you have an intention to fill something, but then it can end up being a very different story. So it's hard to really say it's going to be only about that. I think you need to have some kind of openness to the process to discover the story when you make it as a documentarist. But for the impact, it can still be very. You can still have a clear vision and say, I want to see change in this and that, and the story can go around it, but you can still have a very clear impact vision in mind. So this is one thing. The second thing, I think it's to do a deep research and consult with experts. Like, try to understand who knows best about this. Also, in terms of impact, who is the best opinion shaper about the topic? Who are the organization working on it? And do this consultancy. Speak with them, because they know best. Don't try to be an expert in everything. Try to understand. How can I learn? Who can I learn from? And how can I bring the best knowledge to this creative process, right? And then the last thing I think that is absolutely necessary is to have measurable and tangible goals. And a lot of times I feel that, we want to make the most amazing thing, the most amazing impact. We want to change the world on a big scale, but sometimes it's just not realistic. I think, we need to read the ground, and this you do with your experts, consultancies, and the research that you're doing, right? Sometimes I think it's better to have a modest goal, but be very precise, measure it properly, making sure you're not, diverting towards different goals. And making sure that you measure it along the way, because you want to use this data to see, did you succeed or did you meet your goals or your impact goals? So yeah, I think those are like the absolutely necessary for me, again, the way I see it.
Yeah, seeing if you really created an impact by measuring it is also important, in my opinion. Also, to move forward with the project if you want to do it longer, or also with another project that goes in the similar direction. And what do you think makes a successful impact campaign?
I think it needs to be laser focused. Again, it's complementing what I just said, but I think, knowing what you want to change, understanding where are you putting the energy, because energy can be spread out and sometimes being wasted. So again, I think if you have this impact first approach, you can really decide, this is what I'm going to focus on, and you try to pursue that. Second thing, again, I think it's that impact campaigns needs to be measured. And sometimes you want to consult academics or social scientists to really get this approach right early on, and not remember at the end that you want to do this and that, because it may be too late for what you want to measure or the way you want to measure it. We need experts that understands how to do it. And again, this is the hat of the impact producer. We bring all this expertise together to try to make the most successful campaign we can. And the last thing, again, I think it comes back to bring a wide range of stakeholders, especially from your target communities or your target audiences. I think leaving them out is wrong, and we see, more and more films that are getting local communities engaged. We see that in many, many different levels. And then you also see very successful campaigns, right? I can maybe refer to The Territory that was made for National Geographic and Disney, that I think, was a fantastic film, but also a fantastic campaign that was happening in parallel. And they brought, the indigenous people to really bring their own voices, and they brought the activists working in Brazil to bring their own voices. And I think that was beautiful and right. And I want to encourage, other creatives to try to pursue something.
Yes, that was a really great project and had a lot of success. And from 2021 to 2024, you were the regional program lead for climate and water diplomacy, where you played a pivotal role in fostering cooperative efforts among Palestinians, Israelis, and Jordanians to address climate and environmental challenges. Your leadership facilitated the establishment of a regional network for future collaborative projects with EcoPeace Middle East. Can you tell us more about your work there?
Sure. So first of all, EcoPeace Middle East is a very unique organization. That there's no organization that I'm aware of that has offices in the three territories, both in Amman in Jordan, in Ramallah, and in Tel Aviv. Basically, it's an interesting story because I told you I was working 6 years in Latin America, and when I came back to the Middle East, I was trying to just learn what's the environmental issues that are most urgent here. And I signed up to this pilot program. It was just the beginning of that program of the water and climate diplomacy of EcoPeace. I had the first chance to connect with people from the other side, and I've just started to realize how powerful it is to have something in common that you can resonate and care about, such as the environment. And how powerful it can be, in peace building. It's no secret that our region is very troubled right now and has been troubled for the past 75 years. And for me working on this, it gave me a lot of hope because I got to see some other voices coming out of this very troubled region. After I did the program, EcoPeace hired me to lead that program, and ever since I had the pleasure of working with Palestinian colleagues, Jordanian colleagues on this program. I was managing it regionally and helping in not only write content and help in educating and providing tools and skills to young professionals. But also to build a community of more than 400 Palestinians, Jordanians, and Israelis that are under the same umbrella of caring about climate change and water security, and are willing to have a conversation about it. And I think a conversation is a start because it's very hard to speak about those things when you're in the midst of a war or there's a lot going on with your people. But I do believe that that's a very powerful way of just it all comes back to narratives. I want to refer back to what we did with the great white sharks. We try to tell a different story, and we try to find a new narrative to tell about the topic and about the cause, and which and I think EcoPeace is doing the same thing. And it's very inspiring. I met amazing friends during my time there. We're still in touch. We're still working together on new projects that are aimed to help some other shared environmental issues, such as the rewilding of the Jordan River or the Dead Sea. Those two very important, very significant sites that are holy. The Jordan River is holy to more than half of humanity. All the Abrahamic religions. It appears in Judaism, Christianism, and Islam, and it lost more than 90% of its historic flow. And in addition to that, it's on the front line of climate change because our region is a hotspot for climate change, right? So we are experiencing double the rise in temperatures in comparisons to the global average. So we have the biggest interest in addressing climate change. But now it's just, it just poses more and more threats on a very holy river that for me represents much more, than the culture or the religion. But it's more about our relationship with the wild. So this is a little bit about the work with EcoPeace that I'm happy to continue and doing in different hats. And I do believe that it's a very powerful tool, not only for storytelling, but also for shifting narratives and trying to bring something different from the things that we had up until now.
Great work you have done so far. And my last question, I always ask for advice. What advice would you give someone who would like to start in this career field?
I think I would say be a multi-potentialite. Now, not a lot of people know what this word means. It's kind of a new word. So there's a TED Talk by Emily Wapnick that she speaks about multi-potentialites. And multi-potentialites are the other side of, people that know all their life what they want to do, this one thing. I want to be a doctor, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be an engineer, or, people that know what they want to do. I personally feel that, especially in the filmmaking, I like a lot of things. There's not one thing. It's not that I just like filming or writing or directing or producing. There's a lot of it. And I think in the age that we live in, where you need to be very adaptable, and you need to reinvent yourself all the time, and you have to, find a way, I say be a multi-potentialite. Find the things that are interested in you, and don't just, focus on one thing. You can be many things. You can be intersectional, if you will. And I think specifically for, impact filmmakers, I think, just be curious. Be really curious. The power of curiosity, I find, is huge, because when you're genuinely curious about things, the things that comes out, the things that you discover with it are just, the potential is endless. So I would say that, there's no one way of doing it or one way of doing things. But I think generally, bring those stakeholders together. Do this value creation, create value for all the people that you're being involved in. Think outside of the box, seek the interest, try to find the opportunities, keep applying, even if you get a no after a no after a no. Eventually you're going to get a yes, statistically speaking, right? And maybe the last thing I want to say is, try to understand your why. What is your motivation? What drives you? Because, as you know, filmmaking journeys can be very difficult, very long, very tiring, and we need to find this motivation from within, right? So if we know our why, if we know our motivation, if our heart is clear and we know what's bringing us to the world, I think it's a very powerful thing. And and I wish all the listeners and the people that watch to find some of this.
Thank you for this great advice and for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure talking with you and really interesting. I hope to talk with you soon again.